So good morning. As Shuen said, I'm Kathryn. I'm a postdoc, and I've been here for just over 2 months. I became very interested in perennial grain crops in 2005 when I was an intern here. And growing up in Oklahoma, I learned at an early age about the Dust Bowl, and then later in college, learned about a lot of the problems with the resource intensiveness of agriculture. And so perennial crops offer many solutions, and I wanted to be involved in their development. So I'm now very happy to be here at the Land Institute again, working with Shuen, and also a little bit with Lee and David on other crops as well. So perennial wheat, as Shuen talked about, is developed by cross-pollinating wheat and intermediate wheatgrass, or kernza. And the advantage is that we can get the large seed size from the wheat while maintaining the perenniality of kernza. So Shuen has proposed some really exciting ideas, and he just showed you about the regrowth habit of perennial wheat. So he noticed that after harvest, the perennial wheat lines continue to produce grain heads, even though there's not time for that new grain to develop before winter comes. But the wheatgrass, which is perennial, stops flowering after harvest. So that was the example of the plants that he just showed. And we think that if we can get the perennial wheat to go into a dormant period after it flowers, it can store the reserves that are needed to regrow in the spring. And that kind of reminds me of one of Aesop's fables of the ant and the grasshopper. So the grasshopper spends all of its summer being lazy, failing to store supplies for the winter. And like the grasshopper, the perennial wheat that do regrow spend all of their summer and fall using resources, producing more progeny that will never develop instead of storing reserves for the winter. The perennial, on the other hand, have been storing their resources underground all summer, like the hardworking ant. And so in the fall, they rest and avoid expending their reserves and have plenty of stored nutrients to regrow the following year. So in addition to working on the perennial regrowth habit, we'll also work on some other projects. So one of those that I'll be working on initially will be to understand what happens genetically when we make a cross between the annual wheat and the wheatgrass, or kernza. So when we cross those two species, it's not possible to keep all of the chromosomes that come from both species. And usually what happens is we have most of the wheat chromosomes that are retained, but we lose a lot of the wheatgrass chromosomes. So the cells aren't able to support chromosomes for all species. And so my project, what it involves is finding out which chromosomes from wheatgrass are kept, and if those are kept at random, or if there's always a certain set that's retained. So then we can find out if particular chromosomes are important for perenniality or seed size or other traits that we're working to improve. And we can make our breeding program more efficient by only growing the plants that have that particular chromosome or set of chromosomes that's going to be useful. So I'm also going to be working on some other projects that I won't talk too much about, but I'll have a chance to work on silphium and intermediate wheatgrass with David and Lee. We've noticed some diseases that are present on the crops, and we want to find out what pathogens are causing those diseases. Some of the plants in the field may be able to resist infection due to their genetics. And so we want to try to ensure that any genetic resistance is present in the varieties that they develop. So it's my goal that hopefully these projects will contribute to better understanding of the genetics of perennial crops, and will allow for the utilization of more perennial plants in agriculture. And then kind of as a final wrap-up for the analogy to the grasshopper and ant story, it seems that the perennial plants and ants have a good strategy that's applicable to humans also. They save resources for the future and build communities instead of squandering the readily available resources like the annuals. So, thanks.